Hey everybody, Riot Mort and Riot Kent back here for the patch 12.6 rundown. It's 10:40 Sunday evening. It's late. Regionals happened. We just did the post-mortem. And now it's finally time after a damn near a month to move on to patch 12.6 and talk about what's coming next.
Yeah, actually very excited to share this patch because we did a lot of changes in this patch that are going to make quality of life a lot better. Hopefully, we worked a lot on some trait reworks. Did a big pass on slowing down combat a little bit that we'll talk about later. But overall, yeah, just a very exciting patch.
Yep.
And really fun to get into right after we watch regionals too, which is great because we can bring that into it.
Yeah. Goals wise, this is like our last patch to kind of like make some of the bigger changes we're looking to make, which will then lead into like 12.7 being a stabilization patch because 12.7 is the patch that the championship will be played on. So we'll do that. And then we'll have about a month after that where we can, get a little wonky after the competitive stuff. But this is our first, like, our last big batch of changes before competitive finals. So, which is a little weird because I know regionals just happened. But we're trying to, like I said, make it a healthier, even healthier championship. So,
Yep.
cool. All right, should we dive right into it?
Yeah, let's get going.
Sweet. All right. On the system change side, two things we need to talk about. Nothing too crazy. The first is for all you people that yell at me for using a mouse, we've added some hotkeys for the combat recap, so you can press Tab, A, and S. You can customize those also. They have things in the settings. If you like these changes, tell our UX people thank you. But yeah, some cool changes here.
Don't worry, Mort will still be clicking
Oh, I
everything.
will absolutely be clicking. Absolutely. On the augment side, you can no longer be offered 3 economy augments in the same round, so removing that low roll scenario. That should help with variety quite a bit. And
Yep.
then, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that one. One of our goals for this patch was to kind of do our best to increase the like feel good of getting your augments to have more choices, more decision making around it. One of the ways we did that is by removing a lot more of the bad rolls, which is like when you get 3 economy augments, you don't really have a choice there. It's kind of like you're picking 3 things that are either way going to give you economy, and so that's the first step that we're taking towards that goal.
Yep. And then the second change is to address a bug. But what's going to happen is you're going to need to make your augment choice 2 seconds before the round ends. So please note, if you haven't made your augment choice yet with 2 seconds left, it's going to choose for you. The reason for this is what was happening is if you had Recombobulator in your shop, and if it automatically got selected, it would cause some really, really bad bugs. And unfortunately, this was the only way to solve it. Realistically, you should have chosen your augment long before this, but warning you now, we'll work on the UX long term, but this is what we had to do to fix this very bad bug.
Yeah, and just to clarify, even if you picked Recombobulator at the literal very last second, it would also cause the bug. And so that was the cases where this was happening. And so we needed to do this change to prevent that from happening.
Yep. Cool. Okay, on to real changes. Hextech. Hextech has continually had this problem where when we first launched it, it was wildly OP. If you had 4 Hextech early, you just dominated completely. And then it was just really, really strong in the late game. So in order to make that healthy, we had to nerf it. But because it's flat numbers, what ended up happening was it was like good in stage 2 and 3, especially if you had like 6 Hextech in stage 3, and then it would fall off a cliff with the exception of 8 Hextech. 8 Hextech was good, everything else was kind of garbo. That was the problem with flat numbers. So we're adding some scaling in. So kind of like clockwork, the way it works is as you get more augments, the power increases. And so this way, Hextech can actually scale into the late game. And so you can see that applies to both the shield and the damage. And so you can literally look at the numbers here. And so like, let's say you just got your second augment and you're running 4 Hextech. Well, you used to have 170 shield, now you'll have 210. And that 210 will become 240 after the third augment. And so overall, it's actually a buff for most things, except for 8 Hextech early. But even 8 Hextech later gets a small buff here. So overall, this should make Hextech still healthy and not oppressive in the early game, but actually much more playable in the late game.
Yep. And just to clarify on how the bonus shield and magic damage works is once you pick it, you already have 1 augment, and so you're getting 20% on top of the numbers that it's showing you. So basically, like as soon as you pick your first augment, on 2-1, once you put in 2 hextech, you'll have the bonus. But on like I guess stage 1-3, you won't have the bonus. But yeah, this is our way of making the scaling a lot better, and rather than have hextech just be really strong early and just fall off.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. And then Enforcer. I got to be real with you. 2 Enforcer is just not fun. You basically get it for free in a lot of comps, right? You run Sejuani plus Vi, cool. Maybe Jace plus Vi in the late game. And guess what? You lock down their highest HP target, which can sometimes be their 3-star 3 cost, which is pretty anti-fun. And you just lock it in place, basically free. And so what we've decided to, like, this is a big nerf, but frankly, it's to try to make the game more fun, is that if you want Enforcer, you need to invest in it. You can't just luck into it for free. So you're going to need to run 3 Enforcer. If you do, we'll give you 4 seconds on their highest HP target. So it's the same as the old 2-piece with 1 extra second. So you can still use it in the right cases, but you're going to have to invest in it. So you'll see later we're giving some compensation buffs to some of the Enforcer units to make up for this fact. But overall, this trait was just proving to be not fun, how everyone was just kind of getting it in for free. So we're taking that out. That's the real big change here.
Yeah, we found that most people weren't really thinking about playing around Enforcer. Was more like, I'm going to play these units like Vi and Sejuani and get Enforcer for free, essentially. And so this makes it so if you want it, you're like, I have to think about putting in a Jace, or I have to think about putting in a Caitlyn.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Cool. Yep. Okay, probably the biggest change of this patch is that generally we were watching a lot of fights throughout all the various things that have happened over the last few weeks, and we're just seeing AD damage way too high across the board. Things like Talon and Warwick, who are supposed to be like half and half AP and AD, being mostly AD, and just things like, the Assassins doing too much, Aurelia doing too much, Senna there's just way too much AD for free across the board. So we went and did a pass and basically lowered the AD of almost every non-caster comp in the game, because casters were already at that 40 base. And so you can sort of see here, Caitlyn -5, Alawi -10, Nocturne But basically, all of this will just lower the amount of AD damage in the game, which should help AP comps a little bit as well, lower the pace of combat a bit, and generally make for what we think will be a healthier meta.
Yeah, and a lot of what this hits also is these 3-cost reroll comps. Like, for example, Corki was dealing a lot of AD damage despite having most of his damage loaded into his spell. His AD will be a lot lower now at 3-star because of this nerf. So you'll see a lot more of his damage be AP, which is what we intended to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like our goals were twofold here. We're basically like, we want to make sure the split looks good, but also nerf some of these reroll comps, and also just lower the pace of combat.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, because the thing to note here is the 3-stars are the ones getting hit by the hardest here. So, for example, Twitch is losing 16 AD at 3-star, and that's intentional, right? We're just seeing those Twitch auto attacks be way too hard compared to his spell, even. Same with Nocturne, same with Caitlyn. Like, there's so many examples here. Talon, we want most of Talon's damage to come from his spell, not from this high 3-star AD. And so, yeah, like I said, this is probably the biggest change on the patch, though. You're going to see a pretty big paradigm shift here, as this will slow down combat, hopefully a decent amount, without, like, severely nerfing everything. So,
yep.
Cool. In addition, so Caitlyn, even though she got her AD lowered, is getting a compensation buff as an Enforcer, since Enforcer is not as attractive as a trait. She's getting another 0.5 attack speed. This actually makes her really good. We saw GV8 already play this in regionals, where it was like Caitlyn with 3 items. I think Caitlyn is going to be an amazing item carrier now with the 0.8 attack speed. Something like Deathblade, Hurricane, Ginsu, stuff like that. But this will make Caitlyn a very desirable unit, I think.
Yeah, attack speed gets her to her cast faster, and so she will more reliably kill at least 1 unit. If you stack her with Shojins, for example, she might get 2 more easily. She does lose the 5 AD from the previous page, but this is a more important stat for her, and so it'll work out.
Yep. All right, Swain. Swain, I think, probably gets my vote for literally the worst champion in 12.5, at least. I can't think of a worse champion I'm less excited to itemize.
Yeah, this unit was not very good, especially at 3-star.
Yep. That being said, I mean, we did see some people make it work in some Arcanist builds, so it's not like he's the worst, so we're not majorly buffing him. But we do want him to have a very slight buff, help out the Arcanist builds a tiny bit here. So just a little bit more spell damage at 1 star, a little bit at 2 and 3, and then a little bit of extra healing at 1 and 2 star. So just a little bit of a buff, but hopefully this takes Swain from the worst unit to like an unit is the goal here.
Yep. Yeah, I think you covered it.
All right, Malzahar. Let's talk about Malzahar.
All right.
Synaptic. We talked about it in the patch postmortem, but Synaptic is the thing that we're trying to nerf here. This is specifically targeted at Synaptic Malzahar. The problem with Synaptic Malzahar is it put his mana to 20, you put a blue buff on him, and then he was basically auto-cast, 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 auto-cast. Way too much damage. This is going to lower it to 40, which means if you have a blue buff Malzahar, it now requires 2 autos. That is significantly lower damage output by a lot. This is a massive, massive nerf to Synaptic Malzahar. And that's the point. We want Synaptic to be fun so that if you pull off like a Mutant Spat and put it on an Ari, that's still a cool high roll, but you don't just level 6 roll down for 2-star Malzahar, win the game off that. So that's the mana change here. That's a big thing. If you're playing non-Synaptic, though, what this basically means is you still get your first cast, but your second cast is going to be harder. To compensate for that, we've upped his attack speed a little bit so that actually he could use something like a Shojin a little bit better and generate that mana a little quicker, and we buffed his spell very slightly. So hopefully this still allows him to be a very good carry that you're excited to get for like Arcanist, regardless of the mutant output or the Arcanist output, while also, frankly, taking him out back and shooting him in the Synaptic build.
Yep. Mort covered most of this, but with this like exact mana pool, we're also looking at, you know, when you have no Synaptic and you're playing Malzahar with 80 mana, you can use still both blue buff and Shojin. You prefer Shojin, but you also kind of want to go for a Scholar to round him out. You already have Cassin in there, so it'll hopefully, our goal is not to nerf non-Synaptic Malzahar, aiming for something more neutral. But with Synaptic, it was just winning the game with 2-star Malzahar wasn't okay, and we had to go really hard on that one.
Yep.
The reason we didn't want to nerf the just to reiterate, we didn't want to nerf the trait itself was we wanted those, like, you know, finding the mutant spat, coming up with a cool strategy around that to still be fun and exciting.
Yep.
You know, things like Ari, things like Vi, Tom Kench, those kinds of things to be really exciting. So we didn't want to touch that yet. If we'll keep an eye on it, and if we need to go further in the future, that might be an area that we can adjust.
Yep. Okay, Aurelia. As we mentioned, Aurelia was definitely the big miss of 12-5. Definitely a little too strong, so we are nerfing her. We're nerfing the spell by 10, so she'll be a little harder to get those casts if she like hits a tank or something like that. Keep in mind, if she kills her target, the reset is still instant, so she can still do those crazy bursts. And we're lowering her base spell damage a little, and this is on top of the 10 damage, the 10 AD reduction she got. Now, all of this combined, there's a world where it's not enough. There's a world where it's too much. We are over-swinging on Aurelia, frankly, for game health. I think we've seen a lot of Aurelia, and if she ended up a little weak, that's okay. It might be good for a change for a little bit. We'll keep an eye on it. If it's not enough, which I think is less likely, then we'll deal with it in a B patch very quickly. But overall, I think this might be a tiny over-nerf, but it's probably healthy for the game to do it.
Yep. For the mana nerf, the 10 mana doesn't matter as much for melee champions because they take damage and they gain mana back. But we were seeing at 0 out of 30, Aurelia was frequently just constantly casting from taking damage. And with the BT and 3 Socialite, she was never able to be killed. So this opens her up a little bit, keeping that window slightly big. But from a design perspective, we were shooting for the goal of like keeping her sharp. We want this spell to still be really satisfying, especially when you get the resets and dash around the entire board. So we didn't want to reduce that and make it so that, you know, those resets aren't as satisfying. We just wanted to reduce her power from other parts of her kit. So, you know, we do this by taking away from the autos. We went light on her spell damage, and we brought down her mana so that she's not in this infinite cycle as often.
Yep. Cool. 5 costs. You want to talk about Galio?
Yeah. So for Galio, Galio's struggling to be a good unit. Late in the game, you know, when you have a fully capped board, and you have a Galio 2. He's really good to add in, but then he's just kind of really hard to play, and it's really hard to get to that kind of spot. And especially Galio 1 was really hard to fit on your board and wasn't really worth 2 unit slots. So we're buffing Galio's spell stun duration from 1 to 1.5 at 1 star. This will make him a lot more useful, and it's a really big buff to his CC capabilities. And then from the spell damage portion, we kind of want to open up a different type of build, lean more into the spell HP percent damage, so that, if you stack him with Warmogs, you'll get more damage out of that, rather than, going for a Rabadon's Death Cap and a Jeweled Gauntlet on his spell damage. He'll still benefit from like spell crit and all that kind of stuff, and you can create some really cool builds around that, which is we did back end in some sims, and it's really fun. But we didn't want to go too far where, we go back to that 10% where Galio used to just like wipe boards back in PvE.
Yep.
But yeah, generally like a shift in what kind of itemization while also providing a nice buff, especially to 1 star.
Cool. All right, Jace. Jace, basically, this is meant to be a very, very light tap to 2-star Jace. 2-star Jace just overperforming a little bit, so we're tapping him down. And then the dirty secret, by the way, is that range Jace 3, like we want 3-star 5 cost to be amazing, don't argue that. But Jace in particular was like beyond amazing. If you math it out, it was like 1,000 base damage, and then his spell multiplied that by 500%. It was just doing wonky things, so we're just bringing that back down to reality a little. He's still going to instant wipe boards, but again, this is like tiny nerf to 2-star Jace, and then 3-star like an unnoticeable but realistic nerf.
Unplayable now, more.
Yeah, right. All right, Silco. Silco, we're trying to solve 2 problems here. One, there really wasn't enough of a difference between 1 and 2-star Silco. We're pretty happy with where 1-star Silco is right now. A lot of people actually sometimes accidentally grief their own comps with him, and that's kind of the intention. But with 2-star, you get an extra second, so at least you're less likely to grief yourself. And then in addition, 3-star Silco, sorry Milk, I know you had a rough game with this. 3-star Silco just wasn't exciting enough. Like, you'd accidentally blow up your comp, and like they would die in 6 seconds. So we're making it 10 seconds, and when the things explode, the radius is now double, so it's very unlikely to miss. Hopefully this pushes us closer to like Silco 3 feeling like all the other 3-star 5 costs. That being said, these won't show up on the tooltip. It will still work this way. What'll happen is when you level them to 2-star and you highlight it, the number will change. But 12-7 will get these in on the proper tooltip.
Yeah, we saw a lot of the problems with Silco 3 was that the damage kills anything, but oftentimes the explosion was so small and sometimes units wouldn't be able to walk up to the backline in time before they died. So with both a longer spell duration and also a bigger explosion, they can now get closer and just insta wipe the backline. So that's the intention behind the 3-star change.
Yep. Finally, Zeri. Zeri got the AD nerf that we talked about earlier. She's getting a little bit of a spell nerf here, but this is mostly because we're fixing a pretty bad bug with her, where her attack speed was capped at 1.0. That's supposed to be 5.0, but basically we fixed that. So now Ginsu's is actually a decent item on her. You can get her attack speed much higher. 5.0 Zeri zipping around is pretty hilarious to watch. I will say, if anyone's going to be strong this patch, our guess is Zeri. Zeri should be pretty good,
Yep.
but let us know what you think.
Yeah, and to be clear on the bug fix, it was like not just a cap. Her attack speed was always 1.0. So basically, if you have no items on her, instead of 0.8, she was at 1.0. So the base of Zeri is technically weaker. But if you have any items, Zeke's, you have anything on her, she's going to be better. And so if you put a Rage Blade on her, like Mort said, it'll be really fun. Just watch that zip around.
Yeah, just play triple Rage Blade. Trust me.
Yep.
All right, Edge of Night, Brink of Dawn. I think this is the final change that's going to make this item really popular again. Right now, there's this really annoying thing that happens when it procced. You stand around for a second, and then you uncloak. It's really dumb. We're fixing it. So now, when you are stealthed, you can keep attacking and casting spells. And so I think this will actually push this. Like, this item still had good uses on things like Kaisa and Jinx. I think this item is going to be really good now. And so I think this is as close to the healthy GA we've always wanted it to be, and so I'm glad to finally see this change in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good change, and it'll feel more like if you've played with Zanya's Paradox from the Ornn item, it'll feel more like that, where the unit goes invulnerable, kind of, and then can continue attacking.
Yep. Cool. All right, on the Augments side, big thing to note here is Electrocharge and Ludens kind of like Hextech had this problem where they were really good in stage 2 and 3 because they're flat numbers, and then they fell off a cliff. Or in 12-4, when they were just ridiculously OP because the flat number was too high and they would dominate the early game. Now they scale. And so the way they works is basically they show a number on the tooltip, so it'll say like between 50 and 95, and it will scale up per stage up to stage 5 or stage 8 for hyperroll. So at stage 2, electrocharge instead of 60 does 50, so it got nerfed. But at stage 3, it's now 65. Stage 4, it's now 80. And stage 5, it's 95. And so you can see, generally this allows it to be a little less strong in the early game, but better in the late game, and so generally a better augment. Same is true of Ludens. I think this just makes these much healthier augments. Also, that 175 should be green, but whatever. You get the idea. Nerfed in the early, buffed in the late.
Yeah, it was often pretty feels bad to see one of these like early game augments in stage 4, even though our changes in 12.5 were just band-aid changes while we were making these changes. It just felt pretty bad to see that, and so this will make that feel better. But also, when you get it, you're no longer just gonna think about it as a tempo augment. It's more like you can plan your game around this because it will scale up and it will go to pretty high amounts of damage later in the game.
Yep. Okay, I admit this change isn't the cleanest change, but let's talk about this.
Spicy one.
Well, yeah, there's also better ways we could have done it, but whatever. It's not great. Innovator Heart. Innovator Heart is just a very, very powerful tier 1 augment. When we were first making augments, we were literally like, every trait we can, here you go, +1, right? The reality is that our game is complex, and a systemic solve like that isn't going to work for every trait. We still have other problems to solve here, but the reality is Innovator Heart is just too powerful for a tier 1. It allows you to hit 5 Innovator really early. It allows you to hit 7 Innovator at all. It's just really, really good. Now, I know you're going to say, well, what about the Tome of Traits? Well, Tome of Traits is basically you can high roll it, but you can't force it. This is literally like best case scenario all the time. So because of that, we're making it a tier 2. Now, you could make the argument, why didn't you just make it an emblem and make it tier 2? And I think that's fair. I think that is a fair thing, and that's what I'm kind of groaning about, like we could have done better here. But the reality is we don't want there to be a tier 1 augment be how you get to a guaranteed Hextech 7 or Dragon 7, So TLDR, big nerf to this augment.
Yep. Also, just like I think we can we're starting to learn more about like how we think about augments and especially these like trait augments. We're learning more every single set, and we're like every single patch, and we're kind of like making changes. Like, for example, going from souls to crowns are big changes. Innovator Heart, we're starting to learn that, maybe like not all trait hearts are made the same. So maybe they can all actually be different tiers, or like maybe some emblems, some crests don't have to exist, that kind of thing. And going forward, we are more open to making changes like that once we establish like solid rules around all of that. Yep. Also, we wanted to make a change like this instead of just nerfing 5 and 7 a lot, because we want to make sure that like when you hit those points and let's say you high roll a innovator emblem from Tome of Traits and you get a dragon, we still want to make that really exciting. That dragon should be a really big high chase trait payoff. So that's why we didn't like just gut the dragon and keep the Innovator Heart in there for you to consistently be able to hit it.
Yep. Okay, another spicy change here. So our line for augments has always been, or would we be okay with the World Championship being decided if a player hits this augment? And Innovator Soul just continues to be this augment that performs ridiculously high in the data, even if you balance, 5, like even just 5 Innovator. The challenge is, it's like it allows you to take out the bad units, put in the good units, make a much more powerful comp. It's just too powerful. Its stats were too high, and there was really no healthy way to nerf it. So the reality is we're taking it out of the game, And again, this is us slowly starting to inch towards a better state for augments. This is an augment that, again, it only appeared at 4.6. It had requirements, but it was just too powerful, so it's gone.
Yeah, we like that 7 Innovator is really powerful, but there was kind of this like unit tax that you have to play these low cost units, or these units that aren't adding as much to your team as, for example, if you could take 2 of them out and put in I don't know, Jinx and another 4 and 5 cost. You can cap your board out way higher, and so being able to reach that meant that we would have to nerf the trait some more, and we didn't want to do that.
Yep.
So this is why we just took out the Innovator Soul. And then also part of my previous point where like not every trait needs a prismatic augment, for example.
Yep. Share the spotlight. When we made this change, this was actually before we knew about the bug. So share the spotlight was performing very, very well in the data. Kind of makes sense now after the fact that it's like, oh yeah, it turns out giving your entire team an extra 10 to 20% extra damage a little much. But that being said, we're still going through with this nerf because it'll make Socialite just a little easier to understand anyway. It's like all the hexes do the same thing. And so hopefully this should still be a pretty decent prismatic. If it's not, we'll change it, but that's why we're still going through with this nerf.
Yep.
And then So Small, I suppose this is another controversial one, but as we move forward, Kent and I were literally just talking about like should trait emblems all not be tier 1 or something, but whatever. The TLDR, So Small, really just too powerful for a tier 1. So we're buffing it to a tier 2, or nerfing it to a tier 2. But we are giving 5% of the dodge chance back to at least put it at about tier 2 power. All that being said, though, for fun, we also made it finally shrink the Yordles. So enjoy your tiny Yordles.
Yeah. For those of you who didn't catch that conversation where me and Mort talk about these trait augments, and if you're interested, they're in the post-mortem. When we start talking about the B patch, we go on a little like tangent about trait augments and their relation to the traits and how we should think about their power levels. But yeah, back to this augment. It's really, really strong as a tier 1. And if we go even lower, like let's say 15% dodge chance, it's just not as exciting anymore. And so bringing it to gold and keeping its power level like relatively high keeps that excitement in there. And yeah, the biggest buff of all makes your Yordle smaller.
Indeed.
Now we just need a Yordle spat to make your Galio tiny.
Nice. All right, Innovator. As we mentioned, just tiny, tiny nerf to Innovator here. We're still seeing 3 Innovator just be a little too strong. So all we're doing is nerfing the Innovator spell damage reduction. It's one of the most invisible parts of his kit by 5%. Very, very tiny buff or nerf. We don't expect it to change much. You're still going to want to run 3 Innovator early. And then 5 Innovator, the spell giving allies 20 AD and AP. This is actually part of that AD reduction with the invisible AD damage. 20 AD is actually a surprisingly large amount. We're lowering it to 15. That's our small nerf to Innovator without making the bear feel like worthless or anything. Yeah,
we don't expect these to move the needle too much. We're hitting the Innovator opener, the Innovator mid game, but actually just 5 Innovator in general. But yep. I think these are like nice little nudges for the comp.
Yep, cool. Ezreal did not get hit by the AD change. His AD was already 45. It's very, very low. It felt really weird for him to have 40 AD, same as like freaking casters. That felt really weird. But he was going to be way too good comparatively if he didn't get some sort of nerf. So we're just lowering the attack speed boost he gets per cast. So he won't cap out quite as high. So this is just a very small nudge to Ezreal. Corki, we are still seeing overperform a little bit. So we just gave him the smallest of nudges and spells, about 5%. Rek'Sai, we're still seeing underperform just a little bit. So a slight mana buff to let her do those repeat cast heals a little bit more. And Sejuani gets a very small health compensation buff for the Enforcer nerf. So at least she'll still be appealing even if you're not getting that Enforcer.
Yep.
Cool. Zac. Small buff to Zac. He's just not quite as exciting of a tank as we were looking for. So he gets a very small DR during his spell. Shouldn't be majorly noticeable, but there it is. And then Draven, even with the AD reduction, was still going to be outperforming everyone else by a pretty significant margin. So it gets a very small spell nerf to his 1 and 2. Keep in mind, this is only the base damage. This is not the AD scaling. So don't look at this and be like, oh my god, his spell got nerfed 20%. No, that's not how it works. This is a very small nerf to Draven, but just a little bit to make his spell not quite as chunky.
Yeah, from Draven, from a design side, we're thinking like those axes are hitting way, like the damage of those axes are way higher than the autos, and we just kind of want to bring that in a little bit when we were thinking about how to nerf Draven further. And also this helps him scale even more with 80% AD rather than AP, because his AP scaler is actually still pretty good. So by reducing it slightly more, it just makes him favor like Deathblade over Deathcap, which is a weird thing to think about for Draven, but that's kind of the design intention there.
Yep. Mistral, we're still seeing this item be a little too good. An 8 second, especially with Future Sight 2, we kind of have to balance around the fact that most of the time you have this, you have Future Sight 2. And so getting the 8 second banish plus 20% attack speed for your team, plus knowing who you're going to fight was just a little much. So we're lowering this down to 10% team attack speed.
Yeah, and with built-in trackers, this set rather than like set 5 when Mistral was around, kind of also just makes it better in general because you can position for one of those 3 players that you think you're going to face, and so having that in there, just in general, the item is really really powerful, and so we're taking away some of that hidden power.
All right, on the augment side, component grab bag is now impossible to get 3 of the same component. The number of people that have sent me screenshots of that happening to them is too damn high. So you can still get, sword, cloak, or rod, tier, but never cloak. So.
Yep, or like sword when you're playing AP or something like that. Yep. So it's a feels good chain.
Yep. Cybernetic Shell gets a bit of an armor reduction. It was just giving a little too much effective health for how good it is. Especially because it's both the health and the armor, so the total effective health was pretty damn high. The Golden Egg, there was one version of the Golden Egg that I think was really unsatisfactory, which was the 100 gold. The 100 gold was like, okay, I have a bunch of gold, now what? So we decided we still wanted this like really high gold version, so we've reduced it to 75 gold, but you get a Tactician's Crown. So at least no matter what, you get instant power to your board, even if all your rolls miss.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
To chime in on this a little bit, there's a lot of the other cash outs let you cap your board higher, and after struggling for a long time to cash out or like to survive for this egg to hatch, if you just get a bunch of gold, you get to match the power of a lot of other boards, but you couldn't cap out higher. And so giving the Tactician's Crown lets you cap out higher than other players who didn't have this augment, and so it makes the payoff more worth it. And so you can use that gold to you still get a lot of gold and still like the gold cash out, but it solves a problem with this loot drop.
Yep. Generally buffing a lot of the underperforming trinkets. Golden Trinket gets Golden Ticket gets an extra 5%. High-end shopping just gets a little bit of extra gold. Lifelong learning, if you live, you get 1 extra AP, so should see some higher potentials from lifelong learning. Rich Get Richer gets 2 more gold. Woodland Trinket gets another 60 health on their clones. I think it's going to be very good now in stage 2 and 3. Will still fall off, but it is what it is. Smoke Bomb is actually not a buff or a nerf. We're just changing the threshold. Specifically, so if you have a Smoke Bomb, Knight's Edge, Assassin, they don't proc at the same time. So that way, yes, that thing. Words. Hard. It's 11 o'clock. Yes. But basically, so Edge of Night and Smoke Bomb don't proc at the same time. And then we're nerfing 2 overperforming augments. Sharpshooter gets a little bit more reduction. Can you believe this thing used to be 40%? Oh my god. Granted, it was different time, different champions, but Titanic Force also secretly still very, very strong, nerfing this. And then probably the most controversial small augment change, though, is that Tiny Titans will not appear on Force 6. So no more Tiny Titans Bedge bailouts.
Yeah, challengers are going to hate us for this, I think, because they'll argue that was I love this augment on 4.6, but not when other people get it.
Yep.
But yeah, I think this is an augment that's going to be still kind of tricky for us to balance. Playing around with health in an augment is not the most straightforward. I think this is an augment that was like way too good on 4.6 and just not as good on the other levels. And so if we need to balance those other levels to make, or those other stages to make it better, we will do that. But we wanted to remove that one stage where like we can't touch the numbers because it will that at that exact stage it was just either too good, or if we went lower it'd be too bad.
Yep. Cool.
Everywhere else, yeah.
All right. And then let's close off with a few smaller things here. Double Up is getting some pretty big changes. Double Up now, reinforcements will not start their deployment until a minimum amount of time has passed. This is huge because imagine your opponent was the mercenary player and you instantly wiped their board. It like before your combat barely even started, you were getting reinforced. It felt bad. Didn't give you a chance to actually beat your opponents. I'm really excited for this change because there were so many times where it's like, I'm playing a strong board, but because my opponent was too weak, I get punished and get reinforced. This should be much healthier. I'm really excited for this one. In addition, player damage calculation has been adjusted. Very small adjustment, but basically it will keep track of your half points. There's no more like taking damage out of the equation. It's a very small change, but it should allow for a little bit more damage overall. And then finally, Mercenary. This one was pretty interesting because basically what happens is you need to both lose to increment your loss counter. If only one of you lose, you only increment it by half a point. So think of it this way. Let's say you're on 0 loss, and Kent and I are playing duos. I'm the mercenary player. I lose, he wins. I'm still on 0 loss. And then I lose and he wins again. Now I'm only on 1 loss instead of 2. But if then I lose and he loses, we're on 2 loss. And so if you really want the deep mercenary payouts now, you're going to both have to lose. Otherwise, you're not going to get nearly the rewards you were getting before.
Yep. We were seeing that mercenary was taking over double up, the dominant strategy. And so it makes sense because player damage is overall lower for several reasons. You're splitting your health, and the other person can just be really strong and keeping your health totals high. And so we're making it harder for people to get extremely high cash outs. Harder is like, it's going to be a lot more similar to live, or that's like the expected result. Yeah, excited to try this because then now, it won't be a bunch of mercenary players getting 3-star 5 costs and double up.
Yep. All right, and then bug fixes. And as always, with all the bug fixes, these are some of them. They're not all of them. We know they're not all of them. So saying, what about this bug? We know. Renata's poison damage should now always properly be removed after she dies. Sweet. Zeri attack speed no longer capped. We talked about that. Cool. This one's interesting, and I don't know how many people realize this, but Lucian and Corky's attacks can now crit while the sharpshooter augment is active. Fixing that bug was a buff, and so that's why we definitely wanted to also nerf the sharpshooter. This is another one I don't think people realize, but it's pretty crazy. Spells will no longer crit without Jeweled Gauntlet when empowered by the 7 Innovator Dragon. This is a pretty big nerf to 7 Innovator Dragon, because secretly it was causing all your spells to crit regardless, so oops. Aurelia and Kha'Zix will no longer taunt, target, and targetable units with their abilities. The most common one was the Self-Repair Innovator, so that should be fixed. This is a great one. Double Trouble will now always grant a 2-star unit when you're 3-star unit, even if no copies are left in the pool. So, if you hit that 3-star Kha'Zix with Double Trouble, you will now get another 2-star Kha'Zix, even if all of them are out of the pool. It's a big change, but I think a healthy and fun one. This is another one I got a lot of reports on. Dragon's Claw no longer triggers after the first tick of Talon's ability. Cool, makes sense. Tom Kench will properly spit out or digest his enemies in his belly when he dies. Hopefully this minimizes the amount of issues where like people were in that invisible state in his belly even though he's already dead. Yep. Fixed an issue causing Mega Nar's ability to fizzle when his target was further than his boulder range. Hopefully that makes Nar better. And then finally, in Double Up, mutant units with the mutant trait active no longer gain bonuses when allied units die while being reinforced from their partner's activation. So basically, Dark Star Double Up could do some wonky things. So there you go.
Yep. A lot of these bugs are, we're going to continue to fix a lot of these bugs, but, a lot of these are things that continue to come. Like, for example, Dragon's Claw, like not working on Talon's ability, something that should have never worked because Dragon's Claw only works on casted spells. Things like that we're going to continue to do. Double Trouble, another one where, this is just generally really good change because it feels really bad when you restart something and you just get gold or you don't get the unit. So. Yep.
Cool. All right, and that is it for patch 12.6. I think regardless of, whether or not... The hope is obviously that the patch is going to end up more balanced. That is the hope. But I'll be honest with you, even if it, isn't perfect... I think we're all due for a change. I think we're all ready to see Aurelia kind of not be around as much, and ready to see maybe some other things show up at the top. So we'll see. But again, my hope is that this is actually balanced, because best case scenario would be 12.7 is nothing, and we got it perfect. But, yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, we always get it perfect anyways. It's fun. But overall, even with this patch, we have a lot of quality of life things in there, or not necessarily quality of life, but stuff that just will make the game better, such as Hextech now scales, Luden's Electrocharge, those things scale. some of the augments won't appear, when you don't want them, like the three econ augments all at once, that kind of stuff. I think will just make the game generally better.
Yep.
So keeping an eye on balance for sure, but making these, I'm excited to like play with these quality improvements.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, that's gonna do it for us. That's 12.6. As I mentioned, second to last patch before Worlds, so should be fun. Cool. All right.
Yep.
That's gonna do it from us. Until next time, take it easy.